Hello everyone, this is ponderonweather. In this update, we're going to go over my fall forecast and how I think the next 90 days unfold and kind of give you an overall summary and snapshot of what's to come. Welcome back everyone. Good morning out there. This is your fall outlook for 2022. I got a lot to go over this morning, so I appreciate all my followers out there and the new followers. If you do like detailed weather breakdowns on North America and the tropics, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's get right to it this morning. This is September 1st, so we're looking at the next 10 days. So what we're going to be looking at is predominant ridge going to be building out west. So where you see all the orange shaded areas, that's going to be a lot of sinking air and a lot of heat going to be contending with, while much of the south and the deep south and much of back into Florida is going to be more of the unsettled conditions, a little bit cooler than average. Then also, a little bit wetter than average for those regions, while much of the northern states and Canada predominantly stays above average, and much of Alaska actually stays below average. So let's take a look at the overall setup as far as temperatures at the surface, and you can definitely see, yeah, with that ridge of high pressure in place, all that red shaded area, much of California, much of the Pacific Northwest, really much of Canada, much of the upper Midwest, really going across the Ohio Valley, sneaking into the Northeast, you're going to be predominantly for the next 10 days above average, where all the unsettled conditions further to the south in Texas to Arkansas to Oklahoma to Louisiana to Mississippi and Alabama, Georgia, back into Florida and the Carolinas are going to be predominantly below average temperatures for the next 10 days. And also that implies where all the unsettled weather is going to be too. So with these above average, precipitation anomalies, with the combination of these stalled fronts this time of year, these eastern Pacific storms that I think are going to be unfolding, I think along these areas with that ridge going to be locked over the Pacific Northwest and much of the West, all that precipitation has to go somewhere, and it just squeezes it out, taking advantage of all those above average sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico, and then it really highlights those areas across the deep south with well above average precipitation anomalies coming for you for the next 10 days. So, but beyond that, we are going to be starting to see a transition, right? So I think the first half of September will be well above average for much of the West and much of the Pacific Northwest. But we do see a subtle breakdown in the overall pattern by the time we get into the second half of September. So that third week, that September 16th to the 23rd timeframe, I do feel the ridge starts to break down and start shifting into more of the central U.S., getting over into the more northern tiers of the U.S., while much of the cooler anomalies are going to be coming back into play for much of the West. But that will also set the stage and increase the severe weather aspects too. So I do feel we're going to be start getting more severe type setups with our second season starting by the middle of September. So, but beyond that, as we go into the last week of September, I do feel it breaks down a little bit, but you're still going to be predominantly two tails of the season, right? So you got the first half well above average, and you got the second half a lot milder and cooler than average for much of the West, while that ridge just sneaks over across the midsection of the country, while much of the deep south will be influenced by these stalled frontal boundaries of the just Gulf of moisture tropical type air mass will be predominantly above average precipitation. So it's all influenced on La Nina. We've been dealing with this La Nina since really September of 2020, right? I mean, and so it won't go away, and it's expected to continue all the way through the fall months. So right now we're essentially still at a La Nina. If times we're sneaking back into a moderate La Nina, and it is expected to actually strengthen a little bit further by the time we get into the end of fall. So if we take a look at that from the latest Climate Prediction Center, yeah, it's essentially an 80% chance, 86% chance. That's a really good probability of this La Nina continuing for September, October, and November. So all those 90 days of fall, the La Nina is expected to be locked in place. Now, there are hints where we're starting to see a subtle transition as we go into the winter months, we have a 60% chance probability going into winter as it flatlines, potentially going into enso neutral by the time we get into the second half of winter. So there are some possible, as we go through the fall months and then go into the winter, we'll start to see, I think, a transition finally out of that La Nina and go into more of an enso neutral. But between now and then, for the next 90 days, it's going to predominantly be in that La Nina type pattern. So the last time we've actually seen this, right, it's been a long time. In fact, if you look at all the chart back from till 1950, you go back all the way to 1999, 2000, and 2001 was the last time we got what they called a triple dip La Nina. But so that basically implies that we have La Nina-like conditions for 3 seasons in a row. So is it expected by the time winter starts, we'll still be predominantly in a La Nina, and that would classify us as a triple dip La Nina. So that's interesting. In 1999, 2000, 2001 was the last time that happened. So why is that significant? And I really think that this is really interesting. Obviously, the Atlantic hurricane season has been really quiet. We've only had 3 named storms out there. And the last time, this is September 1, we've seen a gap like this. The longest duration of between storms is way back in 1999, the last time we had a triple dip La Nina. And today, ironically, would be day 61 of without a named storm. And here we go. If you look this morning, the National Hurricane Center actually classified this system way out here in the open waters of the Atlantic of a tropical depression. In the next 24 to 36 hours, it is definitely expected to become Danielle out here into the open waters and actually going to be our first hurricane of the season, not impacting land, but right there falls exactly in line with 1999, the last time we had that triple dip La Nina. So let's go back to look at that analog year, right? Back in 1999 of what actually happened. Well, they got their 4th named storm of Dennis back on August the 24th. So it's a fairly delayed year. It had 12 named storms that year. And let's look at some of these tracks, right? We've had Alex, we've had Tropical Storm Alex, which was actually in the Gulf of Mexico. It actually didn't become a named storm until it got out in the open waters of the Atlantic, but it took like a similar track than what this little system did, right? Right there in went over portions of southern tips of Florida. Wasn't a named storm by then, but it did get a named storm out in the open waters. And then of course we had Bonnie, right? Well, here's another similar track, right? It was traversing across here. It actually didn't become a named storm until it came through Honduras, and that was the one that crossed over to on the Pacific side and actually became a hurricane on the Pacific side, but it did take a somewhat similar track, right? Then of course we had Colin up here that actually formed off the coast of the Carolinas, right? So we had some similarities, a lot of similarities to 1999, and even this system. You can be pressed that, hey, we had the little system come through Louisiana, but it did become a named storm, but it was certainly on its way and impacted far extreme South Texas that dumped a lot of heavy rain. So again, it took a similar track than what this system did. So there are a lot of similarities, but look at that. Most of the storms that year actually curved and actually went out to sea. We did actually have some impacted landfalls on the United States, but it was not a high impact year by no means of the imagination. Most of the storms actually went out into the open waters of the Atlantic. So if we look at some of these systems were happening right now, I do feel, back here we'll get Danielle, right? It's pretty much almost a certainty. It's going to either get named today, it's going to get named tomorrow, but Danielle's coming. But it's going to be well out to sea, not going to affect anybody, right? more or less a fish storm. And then we've got what could be Earl down here again. It's having its slow trek of developing. It's got a lot of dry air to contend with, and I'll show you some of this dry air. But if after it does, once it passes that dry air, it forms, and I think it does form into Earl and probably forms into a hurricane. But again, all guidance with that ridge of high pressure going to be locked over the northeast would steer it well out to sea, right? And then we got that other system out here off the coast of Africa that's traversing across, but that, look where it's at 10 days from now. It's still well out here into the open waters of the Atlantic. And look at all this dry air, right? I mean, all this moisture up here, this is where Danielle is actually going to form. Look, there's no dry air around it, so that's why it's going to be able to form into a system, right? But here's that little system down here, 91L. Look at all that dry air around it. It's got a tough road to come, right? I mean, it's like that's why the 80% chance has been there several days for the National Hurricane Center, because it's got a lot of dry air to contend with. So once if it happens to come across and get past this right here, and then it'll form into a storm. But other than that, it's got a lot of dry air to contend with between now and then. But look at all the waters and into the open waters of the Atlantic. I mean, it's all these waters off the coast of the Pacific Northwest is really elevated over the last month or two. And we could look at this warm blob out here, plenty of well above average sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico. Even look at the East Coast. I mean, it's pretty much on fire up here. Down here, this is La Nina. I mean, look at all that cooler waters in the equatorial Pacific. That's signifying our La Nina that's been locked in place. But what's interesting going forward, right? We've been in La Nina for a long time. We've been below average for a lot of these areas of precipitation anomalies down here in the deep south. And then this has been the first flip in the overall pattern. So you can get some subtle hints of changes in a La Nina. And that's what we're going to be seeing. So we've been seeing predominantly above average precipitation anomalies for the last week or two. But then overall, for the next 30 days for September, how September is going to unfold, it's going to be predominantly drier than average for much of the Pacific Northwest, much of the northern tier states, much of being influenced. Then down further to the south, we've got to watch for stalled fronts, right? So stalled fronts this time of year, a lot more susceptible. We're in a more overall pattern where we definitely have to look out for stalled fronts this time. What do I mean by that? We have these little stalled old frontal boundaries that sink down into the open waters of the Gulf. We got plenty of warm waters to contend with. Southwest side, you always got to look for low pressures underneath, and that could be spinning up a little tropical storm, right? So we always have to look out for that. And there's the hints of well above average precipitation anomalies right into the open water. So it's hinting, the models are actually hinting at we could have some in close development. So definitely be on high alert for that going on for the month of September. But overall, for much of the south and much of the southeast and the deep south going into Florida, we're going to be seeing well above average precipitation anomalies. But once we get into October, right? So once we remember, we're still in a La Nina, right? I think we're going to flip, right? So we're going to flip to more of a typical type La Nina, what we've been predominantly seeing. So as we transition into October, I think the atmospheric river comes back for the Pacific Northwest. You've been bone dry lately. Some of these records fallen in Seattle and Portland, longest time, so I think it does come back. So you're going to be predominantly dry for September. But once we get into October, we're going to start to see the transition happening of those well above average precipitation anomalies kind of unfolding, coming back for the Pacific Northwest with the atmospheric river coming back into play. And that will set the stage for above average precipitation anomalies continuing, while the rest further to the south takes on, by the desert Southwest, the monsoonal flow really comes to an end by then, by the time we get into October, and much of the south and the southeast will experience below average precipitation anomalies. It doesn't mean it's not going to rain in these areas, because fall is a fairly wetter month for these areas. But overall, on average, we're going to be predominantly the La Nina really starting to take shape by the time we get into October. And this is typically what you see in an over a typical La Nina type pattern, right? You got wetter conditions in the Pacific Northwest. Look at the cooler anomalies filtering in down here from the north, down here from the northwest to the southeast, while much of California, much of the desert southwest, you start drying out for the monsoon, and much of the deep south goes back into those, you know, typical type overall La Nina type setup. So as far as the temperatures go, so here's the alignment, right? You got cooler than average anomalies coming in up north. You've got cold shots. So I do feel by the time September, we're not going to get these snowstorms. I think early season snow. You know, some years we've have snow in Denver, you know, the first week or two in September. That's not going to happen this year. We have some snowstorms happening into Montana this year in September. That's not going to happen. I think a lot of that's going to be holding off until October, right? So I think we'll be more susceptible on areas that will see your first snowfall would be more likely into Montana, back into the Dakotas. And as this fishtails down off the northwest flow, as we take a more predominantly La Nina type setup, what I don't agree with is these below average anomalies down here into much of the south. I think this is overdone, and this will be more on the milder, if not above average side down here in the deep, you know, to the deep south. So as we transition into November, right? So we're still expecting that La Nina predominantly to get stronger. And actually, I think it's going to max out sometime in November or even possible December, right? So, but as we transition to, you know, deeper into November, the La Nina is still prevalent down here into the Pacific Northwest. It actually puts more of a northern California into play. So I feel like your above average precipitation anomalies will drift further south and pick up more northern California, of course, while still influenced with the La Nina. Much of the central and southern California will be predominantly drier, and much of the Four Corners regions, much of Texas down here further to the south will be highly influenced of the La Nina type setup with below average overall precipitation anomalies. And I think with the deepening, strengthening La Nina going into November, I think on average, we're going to see predominantly a pretty warm November. I am expecting you know, it's not like you can't get cold shots, right? So you're still going to get some severe weather aspects. You're still going to get, you know, cold shots from time to time. But overall, if you average out the 30 days, I feel like it's going to be predominantly above average, really, for a good chunk of the country. So, but taking a look back at what happened in summer, where we came from, it was, you know, overall we still had some cooler shots from time to time, but overall for a good chunk of the United States was predominantly above average. There were subtle hints of some little milder conditions, little subtle hints of cooler than average or just average conditions well to the north up here into the upper Midwest and parts of the extreme northern states, but overall it was pretty much predominantly above average for a good chunk of the country in summer. So hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel to catch the latest update where I protect you before and after the storm.